You know what they say about server rooms? They smell like desperation, burnt plastic, and energy drinks. Ours had all three, plus the lingering scent of incompetence that seemed to seep from the walls these days. I'm Dave Mitchell, 52, and I'd been keeping this place running for 18 years. Former Army IT specialist back when networks were simpler but the consequences of failure were life or death. Started here in 2007 when I got out of the National Guard, making $47K a year fixing other people's mistakes. Now I was pulling $87K as senior network architect, which sounds impressive until you realize I was doing the work of 3 people. It was 2:30 a.m. on a Tuesday when my phone started screaming. Emergency alerts lighting up like Christmas, which meant something critical was dying. I'd gotten these calls maybe 200 times over the years. Sometimes it was hardware failure, sometimes human error, but it was always urgent and always my problem. The drive to the office took 12 minutes through empty streets. I used to make this trip in my old Chevy pickup, windows down, thinking about Army days, when a system failure meant soldiers didn't get supply drops or communication went dark in hostile territory. These days the stakes were different, but the pressure felt the same. Our building looked like every other corporate cube farm from the outside, but the 7th floor was where the real work happened. Badge in, elevator up, key code for the server room. The familiar hum of cooling fans and the soft blue glow of status lights. This was my domain. The monitoring dashboard looked like a medical emergency. Database cluster CPU usage at 97%, memory exhausted, transaction queue backing up faster than I could count. Our main client, a logistics company that handled half the shipping for the eastern seaboard, was dead in the water. Every minute this stayed down meant thousands of delayed packages and very angry phone calls. I pulled up the system logs and started digging, error messages scrolling past like machine gun fire, HTTP 503 errors, TCP timeout failures, deadlocked transactions throwing SQL error codes I'd memorized years ago. But buried in all that noise was a pattern. A memory leak in some new optimization code that nobody had bothered to stress test before deploying. The fix took 3 hours. First, I had to isolate the problematic process without bringing down the entire cluster. That meant carefully routing traffic through backup systems while I patched the primary servers. Then came the database cleanup, purging corrupted transactions, rebuilding indexes, verifying data integrity through SNMP monitoring protocols. Army training kicks in during times like this. Methodical, systematic, double-check everything. By 5:45 a.m., all systems were green. Transaction queue cleared, response times back to normal, monitoring alerts silent. I documented everything in the incident report. Root cause analysis, resolution steps, recommendations for preventing. Future occurrences. Standard operating procedure, even though I knew nobody would read it. The overnight security guard, an older guy named Bill who always brought me coffee during these late-night sessions, stopped by around 6 a.m. Another all-nighter, Dave? Just keeping the lights on, Bill. Company's lucky to have you. Most places, something like this would take their whole team all week to figure out. Bill was right, but I didn't say anything. False modesty wasn't my style, but neither was bragging. In the Army, you did your job and moved on to the next mission. Same principle applied here. I grabbed a shower in the executive bathroom, one of the perks of being essential personnel, and changed into the spare clothes I kept in my desk drawer. By 8:30 a.m., I was sitting at my workstation with fresh coffee, reviewing system performance metrics to make sure everything was stable. That's when Brandon Montgomery made his entrance. Brandon was 28, had an MBA from some fancy private school whose name he dropped in every conversation, and had been our chief digital officer for exactly 6 months. He also happened to be CEO Richard Montgomery's nephew, though the family resemblance was mostly limited to the same entitled expression and the belief that confidence could substitute for competence. He strolled into the office at 9 a.m. sharp with his usual Starbucks venti something or other, and that smirk that made you want to check your retirement account balance just to feel better about something. Most of the day shift was just arriving and the overnight crew had already headed home. Just me, sitting at my desk, looking at him like he'd grown a second head. "Great work handling that little hiccup this morning, team," Brandon announced to the mostly empty office. "Little hiccup." I stared at him over my coffee mug. "Crisis management is all about staying calm and delegating effectively," he continued, adjusting his tie like he was posing for a LinkedIn photo. "That's the kind of proactive leadership we need around here." I wanted to ask him what exactly he'd delegated from his bed at 3 a.m., but I kept my mouth shut. This was the same guy who'd asked me last month if we could just migrate everything to the cloud and seemed genuinely confused when I explained that our legacy systems had about 200 custom integrations that couldn't just be copy-pasted to Amazon Web Services. The thing about guys like Brandon is they're not stupid, exactly. They're just dangerous. Smart enough to use the right buzzwords, connected enough to avoid consequences, but clueless enough to break things they don't understand. In the Army, we had a word for officers like that. Actually, we had several words, but most aren't appropriate for polite company. Brandon had been making changes since he arrived. Big changes. He brought in a digital transformation consultant named Jessica, who charged $400 an hour to tell us we needed to leverage synergies and optimize our tech stack. She'd spent 2 weeks interviewing everyone, taking notes on her iPad, and producing a 47-page PowerPoint deck that could be summarized as fire the old guys and hire cheaper people. The writing was on the wall, but I figured I had time. Companies don't usually get rid of the guy who fixes their problems at 3 a.m. I'd been running Guardian, my comprehensive system monitoring and auto repair suite, in the background for 4 years. It prevented hundreds of outages, caught security intrusions before they became breaches, and saved the company millions in downtime costs. Brandon's team had no idea it existed. I was wrong. Over the next month, Brandon started implementing his optimization strategy. First to go was Andy Rivera, our database administrator who'd been with the company for 14 years. Andy was 49, knew our systems inside and out, and had the annoying habit of asking Brandon to explain his technical decisions in detail. "We're transitioning to a more agile, cloud-native approach," Brandon told him during the termination meeting. "Your skill set is more aligned with legacy infrastructure." Legacy infrastructure. That was Brandon's speak for old and expensive. Andy had built most of our database architecture from scratch, optimized it through 3 major upgrades, and could troubleshoot problems that would take a team of consultants weeks to figure out. But he was also making $92K a year with full benefits, and Brandon could hire 2 fresh graduates for that price. Neil Patterson went next. Neil was our infrastructure director, 54 years old with a background in telecommunications going back to the days when network cables were actually thick yellow things you could trip over. He'd seen every type of system failure imaginable and had the institutional knowledge that you can't learn from YouTube tutorials. "Nothing personal, Neil," Brandon said. "We're just pivoting to a more dynamic workforce model." Dynamic workforce model. Translation: young, cheap, and replaceable. The pattern was obvious. Anyone over 45 was getting called into HR for strategic discussions about their career trajectory. Brandon had started scheduling what he called energy assessment meetings with senior staff, asking questions about adaptability to fast-paced environments and comfort with disruptive technologies. The younger guys were nervous but figured they were safe. The offshore transition was happening gradually. A few positions here, a consulting contract there. Death by 1,000 budget cuts. I watched it all from my desk, documenting everything. In the Army, you learn to keep detailed records of command decisions, especially the bad ones. You never know when you'll need evidence later. Meanwhile, Brandon was hiring his transformation team, fresh-faced kids with computer science degrees and exactly 0 real-world experience. They had impressive resumes, internships at startups, certifications in the latest frameworks, GitHub profiles full of sample projects that looked good but had never been tested under actual load. The team lead was a 26-year-old named Casey who'd worked at 3 different companies in the past 2 years. Great at buzzword bingo, terrible at understanding why our 15-year-old ERP system couldn't just be replaced with a trendy new SaaS solution. "Why don't we just containerize everything and move it to Kubernetes?" Casey asked during one particularly painful architecture meeting. "Because," I explained for the 3rd time, "our main application was written in COBOL and interfaces with 47 different vendor systems, most of which don't have APIs. Can't we just write APIs for them?" I looked at Brandon, who was nodding like this was brilliant strategic thinking. "Sure. That would only take about 2 years and cost roughly $3 million. Or," Brandon jumped in, "we could partner with a development firm in Bangalore that specializes in legacy migration. I've got quotes starting at $400K. This was Brandon's solution to everything. Find someone cheaper to do it overseas. He'd already outsourced our help desk to a call center in the Philippines and was negotiating with a firm in Bangladesh to take over network monitoring. The fact that these people would be working in different time zones with limited English skills didn't seem to concern him. "Dave, I know change is hard for people with traditional thinking," he said after the meeting, "but we can't let outdated approaches hold back innovation." Traditional thinking. I was born in 1972, which made me Gen X, but I didn't bother correcting him. Guys like Brandon don't listen to corrections. They just wait for you to stop talking so they can continue being brilliant. The breaking point came in late October. I was in the server room doing routine maintenance when I overheard Brandon on a phone call in the adjacent conference room. The walls were thin, and he wasn't exactly whispering. "No, I understand the timeline pressure," he was saying, "but we can't move forward with the legacy team still in place. They're actively resisting the transition. Actively resisting. I was actively keeping the company running, but apparently that counted as resistance. The old guard has too much institutional knowledge. They make themselves indispensable and then use that as leverage. We need a clean slate." Clean slate. That was a new one. Right, I'll handle Dave Mitchell last. He's the biggest problem, knows where all the bodies are buried, if you know what I mean. But once we get the offshore team fully trained on his systems, we won't need him anymore. I finished my maintenance work and walked back to my desk like nothing had happened. But something had changed. For 18 years, I'd been loyal to this company, worked weekends, handled emergencies, fixed problems that weren't technically my responsibility. I'd turned down 3 job offers from defense contractors because I believed in stability and commitment. That night, I went home to my apartment and opened a beer. My ex-wife, Karen, had gotten the house in the divorce 8 years ago, but I was fine with the smaller place. Easier to maintain, and it was close to my daughter Sarah's college. She was a junior at State, studying computer science, and one of the few people who understood what I actually did for a living. I called her that evening. "Dad, you sound weird. What's wrong?" "Just work stuff." "How's school?" "Don't change the subject." "What happened?" Sarah had always been able to read me. Smart kid, probably smarter than me. She'd inherited my analytical mind, but not my tendency to keep everything bottled up inside. "They're planning to fire me," I said finally. "The idiots who hired the guy who calls databases data warehouses." I'd told her about Brandon during one of our monthly dinners. She'd listened to my stories about his latest brilliant ideas and declared him aggressively incompetent. "That's the one. Good. You should quit before they get the chance. How long have I been telling you to take that job with Titan Defense?" Titan Defense Systems had been trying to recruit me for 3 years. They handled network security for Pentagon contractors and naval installations. The work was more interesting, the pay was better, and they actually valued experience, critical infrastructure protection, the kind of work where failure meant more than just angry customer emails. But I'd always said no, thinking loyalty mattered. "It's not that simple, Sarah. I've got 18 years invested here." "Dad, you've got 18 years of experience. That's an asset, not a chain." She was right, but it still felt like abandoning ship, even if the ship was being piloted by someone who thought icebergs were just frozen opportunities. The next morning, I got the calendar invite I'd been expecting. Subject line, quick sync, HR. No agenda, no context, just a cold little placeholder sitting at 4:30 p.m. on a Friday. The corporate equivalent of a last meal. Friday afternoon came like a slow-motion execution. I spent the morning doing what I'd always done, monitoring systems, reviewing logs, fixing small problems before they became big ones. Around lunch, I got a text from Andy Rivera, who'd been laid off 3 weeks earlier. "Heard through the grapevine you're next on the chopping block. Sorry, man. Word travels fast in the IT community, especially when a company starts hemorrhaging experienced people for no apparent reason other than their birth year." At 4:25 p.m., I walked into conference room B. Brandon was there, perched on the edge of the table like he was doing a photo shoot for Entrepreneur magazine. Next to him sat Patricia Coleman from HR, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else on the planet. "Dave, thanks for coming," Brandon said, crossing one leg over the other like he'd learned the gesture from a TED Talk about power poses. "This won't take long." Patricia slid a manila folder across the table like it might bite her. The tab read "Confidential Employment Termination. As part of our legacy team optimization initiative," Brandon began. "We're restructuring certain senior roles to better align with our future-focused vision." Legacy Team Optimization Initiative. I had to give him credit for creativity. Most companies just called it downsizing. "We really appreciate your years of dedication," he continued, pausing like he was trying to remember what it was I actually did. "But we're moving in a new direction. More agile, more collaborative, more contemporary. Contemporary. There was the youth dagger, wrapped in corporate speak. I opened the folder and scanned the severance agreement. 3-month salary continuation, COBRA coverage for 6 months, standard non-disclosure, and non-compete clauses. The legal language was dense, but I'd learned to read contracts during my Army days when I was responsible for vendor agreements on base IT systems. What caught my attention was Section 7, Intellectual Property and Proprietary Systems. It stated that all company systems and processes would remain property of the company upon employee departure. Standard language except for one problem. They'd never bothered to update my original employment contract from 2007. Back then, the company was smaller and desperate for experienced people. My contract specifically granted me ownership of any original code or systems developed outside normal work parameters, using personal time and resources. The legal department had insisted on this clause to avoid paying overtime when I worked nights and weekends. Over the years, I'd written dozens of custom scripts and monitoring tools, database optimization routines that ran every night to prevent corruption, network monitoring agents using SNMP protocols that caught intrusion attempts before they became breaches, automated failover procedures that kept systems running during hardware failures, all developed on my own time, using my own equipment, because I was tired of being called at 3 a.m. to fix problems that could be prevented. The crown jewel was Guardian, my comprehensive system monitoring and auto repair suite. It had been running quietly in the background for 4 years, preventing hundreds of outages and saving the company millions in downtime costs. The system monitored everything from CPU temperature to network traffic patterns, automatically routing around failed components and triggering TCP health checks when services became unresponsive. Brandon's team had no idea it existed. "Any questions?" Brandon asked, flashing that smile he probably practiced in the mirror. I looked at him for a long moment. "Just one. How long do I have to transfer my proprietary systems?" He blinked. "Your what?" I stood up, unplugged my security badge from its lanyard and placed it on the table like a chess piece claiming checkmate. "My intellectual property, the monitoring systems, auto-repair scripts, database optimization routines, they're mine, not the company's. I'll need to properly transfer ownership before my access is revoked." Patricia's face went pale. She was probably the only person in the room who understood the legal implications of what I'd just said. "What systems?" Brandon asked. "The ones keeping your servers from catching fire," I said. "But don't worry, I'm sure your offshore team has everything under control." I signed the termination papers, shook Patricia's hand, and walked out without another word. The elevator ride down felt like descending from a burning building. 18 years of my life in that place, and it ended with a 15-minute meeting and a handshake from someone who didn't know a database from a doorknob. I drove to Murphy's Diner, 2 blocks away, and ordered coffee and apple pie. Then I opened my laptop and logged into the system for the last time. Guardian was distributed across 47 servers, monitoring everything from CPU temperature to network traffic patterns. Removing it required careful coordination to avoid triggering immediate alerts. One by one, I transferred ownership of each component from the company repository to my personal servers. The process took 43 minutes and was completely legal. The database optimization scripts took another 20 minutes. These ran every night at 2 a.m., cleaning up corrupted transactions, rebuilding indexes, and preventing the cascade failures that had plagued the company before I'd written them. Finally, I revoked the automated failover procedures that had been quietly routing traffic around failed systems for the past 3 years. Without these, a single server failure could bring down entire departments. When I finished, I closed the laptop and ordered another piece of pie. Then I called Titan Defense Systems. "Mr. Mitchell, what a pleasant surprise," said Rebecca Martinez, their CTO. "I was just thinking about you. We have a new contract starting Monday. Network security audit for a naval logistics facility in Norfolk. Pentagon clearance requirements, critical infrastructure protection. Interested? What's the pay? $145K base plus security clearance differential. Full benefits, 4 weeks vacation, and a team that actually knows what they're doing." I thought about Brandon's comment about traditional thinking. "When do I start?" "How about Monday morning? We'll handle all the paperwork. You've got a deal." I hung up and sat back in the diner booth, watching traffic pass by on the street. For the first time in months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten, anticipation instead of dread about going to work. My phone was quiet for exactly 47 minutes, then it started buzzing. Over the next 18 hours, the automated systems I'd built began their slow decline. Without Guardian monitoring CPU temperatures and memory usage, small performance issues went undetected. Database optimization scripts that normally ran at 2 a.m. simply didn't execute, leaving corrupted transactions to pile up. Automated failover procedures that had been silently routing traffic around problematic servers stopped functioning. First text was from Casey, the young team lead. "Hey Dave, weird question. Database response times seem really slow today." Then Patricia from HR. "Dave, quick question about some technical documentation you might have." Then Brandon himself. "Dave, hope you're well. Could you give me a call when you get a chance?" I turned the phone face down and finished my pie. They'd figure it out eventually, or they wouldn't. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. Around 8 p.m., I drove past the office building one last time. Most of the lights were still on, which was unusual for a Friday night. I imagined Brandon and his transformation team staring at error messages they couldn't understand, trying to figure out why systems that had been running smoothly for years were suddenly throwing HTTP 503 errors and database timeout codes. The beautiful thing about Guardian was that nobody knew it existed. It had been invisible, working quietly in the background, preventing problems before they became emergencies. Now that it was gone, every small issue would cascade into a major failure over the coming days. I went home, grilled a steak, and opened a beer. Monday, I'd start a new job with people who understood that experience wasn't a liability. Tonight, I was going to enjoy watching 18 years of frustration finally pay dividends. Monday morning started with 23 missed calls and 47 text messages. I ignored them all and drove to my first day at Titan Defense Systems. Their office was nothing like my old workplace. Clean, modern, but with a serious atmosphere that reminded me of military installations. No open concept nonsense or ping-pong tables, just professionals who understood that national security wasn't a game. Rebecca Martinez met me in the lobby at 7:30 a.m. sharp. Mid-40s, former Navy, with the kind of competence that didn't need to advertise itself. "Welcome aboard, Dave. Ready to do some real work?" The team was everything I'd hoped for. Engineers with actual experience, military contractors who'd seen systems fail under combat conditions, cybersecurity specialists who understood that flashy presentations don't stop hackers. During my first meeting, when I mentioned concerns about protocol implementation, people took notes instead of rolling their eyes. Around 10 a.m., my personal phone started ringing. Brandon's number. I let it go to voicemail. "Dave, it's Brandon. Look, some systems seem to be having issues, and the offshore team is still getting up to speed. Could you give me a call? Nothing urgent, just want to pick your brain about a few things." Nothing urgent. Right. By noon, I had 3 more voicemails from Brandon, 2 from Patricia and HR, and 1 from CEO Richard Montgomery himself. I was in the middle of reviewing security protocols for the Norfolk Naval Facility when Rebecca stopped by my desk. "Everything okay? Your phone's been lighting up all morning. Former employer having some technical difficulties." She raised an eyebrow. "The kind that happens when you fire your most experienced people? Something like that. Well, their loss is our gain. How's the Norfolk assessment coming?" I showed her my preliminary findings, 17 potential security vulnerabilities in their current network configuration, along with detailed recommendations for improvement. Real work with real consequences if we got it wrong. Excellent. The Admiral's going to love this level of detail. Around 2 p.m., Andy Rivera called. He'd been laid off a month ago, but still had friends inside the company. "Dave, you need to see what's happening over there. It's like watching a nuclear meltdown in slow motion." "Tell me." "Started yesterday evening. Email system crashed overnight. Customer portal's been down since 11 a.m. The payment processing gateway is throwing error codes nobody can understand. Casey's been running around like his hair's on fire, trying to get the offshore team to fix things they've never seen before." "What about Brandon?" "Locked in his office, probably updating his LinkedIn profile. Word is the CEO's flying back from vacation to handle the crisis personally." The cascade was happening exactly as I'd expected. Without Guardian's monitoring and automated repairs, small issues were compounding into major failures. The database corruption I'd been preventing nightly was spreading through the system like cancer. That evening, I had dinner with Sarah at our usual place near campus. She was excited about her internship application to Titan Defense. Having a father who worked there didn't hurt her chances. but her grades and programming skills would get her the position. So how was day one at the new job? Professional, competent, refreshing. And the old job? I told her about the calls and messages I'd been ignoring all day. She laughed, the kind of laugh that made me proud I'd raised someone with such a clear sense of justice. Let me guess. They want you to come back and fix everything for free? Probably. Are you going to? What do you think? I think they made their choice when they decided experience was a liability. Now they get to live with the consequences. Smart kid. Tuesday brought escalation. The first news article appeared on TechCrunch. Major logistics software provider experiences extended outage. The piece was short on details, but mentioned that several major shipping companies were reporting delays due to system failures at an unnamed technology partner. My old company's stock price dropped 12% in morning trading. The company that had been valued at $120 million just 6 months earlier was hemorrhaging value as fast as it was losing customers. Brandon called 6 times. I answered on the 7th. Dave, thank God. We really need your help here. Hello, Brandon. How's the digital transformation going? Look, I know how Friday ended, but maybe we can work something out. Consulting arrangement, very generous terms. How generous? Double your old hourly rate. Triple if you can get things stabilized by end of week. I was sitting in Titan's break room, looking out at the Potomac River while eating lunch with people who actually knew what they were doing. Can't help you, Brandon. Dave, please. The board's asking questions. Uncle Richard is furious. The offshore team says they need more time to understand the systems. How much more time? They're saying maybe 6 months to fully replicate your whatever it was you were doing. 6 months. By then, the company would be bankrupt or acquired by competitors at fire sale prices. That's unfortunate. Have you tried turning it off and on again? Dave, I'm begging you. Name your price. It's not about money, Brandon. See, I just accepted a position with Titan Defense Systems. We handle cybersecurity for military installations and Pentagon contractors. Very sensitive work. Can't risk my security clearance by getting involved in whatever mess you've created. The silence lasted about 10 seconds. Security clearance? TS-SCI, maintained through my National Guard service. Titan's been trying to recruit me for years, but I was loyal to you guys. Funny how things work out. I hung up before he could respond. Wednesday brought congressional attention. A House subcommittee on cybersecurity had noticed that several defense contractors were experiencing supply chain disruptions due to the ongoing systems failure. When critical infrastructure starts failing, people in Washington pay attention. By Thursday, the acquisition rumors started. 3 different private equity firms were reportedly circling, looking to buy the company's assets at a steep discount. The offshore team had managed to restore email functionality, but the core business systems remained unstable. Every day brought new cascade failures as systems that had been quietly interdependent began failing in sequence. Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after my termination, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Mitchell, this is Thomas Baker from Hartwell & Associates. We represent the acquisition team interested in your former employer. Would you be available for a consultation regarding systems integration? What kind of consultation? We understand you designed many of the critical systems currently experiencing difficulties. We'd like to discuss bringing you on board to oversee the technical transition. At what rate? $200 per hour, plus equity participation in the acquisition vehicle. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Thanks, but I'm happy where I am. Though I could recommend some good people who might be available. Such as? Andy Rivera, Neil Patterson, and about a dozen other experienced engineers who were recently laid off for being legacy-minded. They're probably available. 2 weeks later, I saw the headline in the Wall Street Journal. Montgomery Technologies acquired by Hartwell Capital in distressed sale. The purchase price was roughly $30 million, 25% of the company's $120 million valuation from 6 months earlier. The new management team included Andy as CTO and Neil as Director of Infrastructure. Brandon was notably absent from the organizational chart. I heard through industry contacts that he'd started a consulting firm focused on digital transformation strategies. His LinkedIn profile still listed him as a thought leader in enterprise modernization, though his endorsement count had dropped significantly. These days, I work on systems that actually matter. Naval communications networks, cybersecurity for defense contractors, infrastructure that keeps the country running. My colleagues respect experience instead of fearing it. When I speak in meetings, people listen. Last month, Sarah got accepted to Titan's summer internship program. Not because of me, but because she earned it with her skills and intelligence. She'll graduate next year into a field that values both innovation and wisdom. Sometimes I drive past my old building during lunch. The parking lot is mostly empty now, and there's a for lease sign visible through the front windows. Progress, I suppose. The best revenge isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just letting people face the natural consequences of their decisions while you build something better somewhere else. The server room at Titan smells like success. Clean, cool, and professionally maintained. No desperation, no burnt plastic, no energy drinks. Just the quiet hum of systems that work exactly as they're supposed to, maintained by people who understand that experience isn't a liability. It's a liability only when you're too arrogant to value it.